Hey, sports fans, welcome to Chicago Sports Profile Millennium Celebration. Here to take us back in time, please welcome nationally acclaimed host and comedian, Mr. Tom Dreesen.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Chicago Sports Profile's 12th Annual Awards Show. This is our Millennium Special, and we really have an outstanding show for you tonight. But before we start, I'd like to announce that the net proceeds from this event will benefit the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. St. Jude, founded by the late entertainer Danny Thomas, is the single largest center in the United States for the treatment and research of pediatric cancer and other childhood catastrophic diseases. Chicago Sports Profiles is on the advisory committee of St. Jude and is truly honored to be affiliated with this renowned institution. Thank you very much. The way we play sports is in many ways the way we live. Someone once said that if you want to understand America, first you must understand baseball. You must understand the feeling that we get when we stand for the Star-Spangled Banner. When we hear the loudspeakers echo, "In the land of the free and the home of the brave," this is what we believe in: equality, justice, teamwork, courage, freedom. This, we remind ourselves every time we hear that pregame anthem, is what America was built on. Our games are the theater for our spirit of ambition and our pursuit of excellence. It's no accident that sports help break down the barriers of ethnic and racial prejudice. We say, if you love to play the game I love to play, then you can be my teammate. White, red, black, or yellow, it makes no difference because the ball, the puck, the bat, or the golf club doesn't know what color you are. And it begs the question, if we can be teammates, then why can't we be neighbors and friends? Good question. In the 20th century, sports answered it again and again. Does prejudice still exist? Sadly, yes. Have sports helped open the doors to opportunity and equality? Most definitely, yes. Tonight, as we stand on the threshold of the new millennium, we decided to change the format of our awards show. Our program pays tribute not to an individual or a team, but to sports itself. A sort of Nobel Prize Lifetime Achievement Award for its impact on Chicago, America, and the world. It's a long overdue honor, as we'll try to show you. Looking back over this tumultuous century, if we look clearly, we will see that sports enabled mankind to slowly chisel away at a mountain of a wall that we call the wall of intolerance, a wall firmly grounded by racial and religious stereotypes in the early 1900s. Professional sports were by and large for white people only. It wasn't until 1947, when Jackie Robinson became the first black player in the big leagues, that Americans truly faced themselves in the mirror and admitted openly how racist a country we really were. Slowly, as more and more baseball, football, and basketball teams signed players of color, as well as players of different religious and ethnic backgrounds, we as a nation began to look beyond our differences and cheer individuals for their talent. 3 cheers, then, for sports. The greatest of athletes will all agree that when they go on a playing field, in order to truly judge their skills, they would have to compete against the best of their time. Through our games, our world and our outlook were indelibly changed, as we will see.
Hi, this is Dan Hampton with Gary Nana. Remember us in the Chicago Six? Well, we'll be right back after this message.
At the last turn of the century, Chicago faced a special set of challenges above and beyond those of other American great cities. In 1871, Chicago had virtually burned to the ground. The Great Chicago Fire destroyed nearly everything: homes, farms, schools, and businesses. But it could not extinguish the city's frontier spirit. With barely a moment to catch its breath, Chicago rebuilt itself into a new modern image as silos gave way to skyscrapers. Out of the charred ruins grew a sleek, sophisticated urban mecca of steel and stone. It was a time of machine-made miracles as America flexed its muscles and stretched the limits of its ingenuity. Progress was everywhere you looked. Yet somehow a woman could still be arrested by a New York policeman for daring to smoke a cigarette in public. You see, even in that heady era of modern marvels and out-of-this-world ideas, there were still some changes America just was not ready to accept. White America, for example, was not ready to accept a black man in 1908 as heavyweight champion of the world. But there he was, Jack Johnson, the first truly great black athlete. One of Johnson's most publicized fights was in 1910 with the powerful Jim Jeffries, who Johnson overwhelmingly defeated. Papa Jack held his title for 7 years. Like Johnson, legendary Jim Thorpe challenged the stereotype of that era by simply running over them and knocking them down. As the title of his movie biography so rightly claimed, Thorpe was truly an All-American, and his success on the field of play was partly because of his national mythology.
But how could anyone be bigger than the Babe? Everything about George Herman Ruth was larger than life. His pot-bellied, spindly-legged slugger dominated and transformed baseball like no one else before or since. After breaking into the game as a brilliant left-handed starting pitcher, Ruth was sold by the Boston Red Sox and became the centerpiece of the New York Yankee dynasty. Once he moved to the outfield and became a full-time hitter, Ruth changed baseball from a bunt-and-run little man's game into a swat-and-trot big man's game. Baseball needed Babe Ruth, and so did a nation of fans who had started to look skeptically at the game after the Black Sox scandal of 1919. While Ruth was rescuing baseball, a young man from Wheaton, Illinois was putting professional football on the map. Red Grange, the galloping ghost, was a college phenom at the University of Illinois, thrilling crowds across the Midwest with his slashing running style. George Halas lured him to the Chicago Bears, and Grange made his NFL debut on a snowy Thanksgiving Day in 1925, drawing a crowd of 36,000 at Wrigley Field. Football was moving into American mainstream, challenging baseball and boxing for sports supremacy. The heavyweight circuit was still king of the hill, thanks to rivalries like the one between Jack Dempsey and Gene Tunney. The country virtually stood still during the big-time bout like the famous Dempsey-Tunney long count match in 1927. Huddling around radios or gathering in city squares to wait for updates delivered on huge scrolling electric signs. Sports were no longer just pleasant diversions. They had become part of a popular culture, a theater for heroes. Golf had its Bobby Jones, tennis had its Big Bill Tilden. In sandlots and stadiums, America was finding its sense of community through sports. And that spirit of togetherness would be tested as the country faced another huge challenge, the Great Depression. Chicago had been rebuilt from the ashes of another scourge, spreading like wildfire through the city. The gangsters and their Tommy guns had held the city in an unforgiving iron grip. The stain of their legacy would stay attached to the city for decades to come.
The underworld tried to control Chicago in the 1930s, but the Cubs owned it. Capone, Dillinger were the names whispered. Grimm, Herman, Collins, Hartnett, Hack, Root were the names shouted. The Capones exploited the people's depression. The Cubs were out to lessen it. If even temporarily, blissfully, the boys with the bats were frequently more successful than the men with the guns.
Murderers Row was not a gangster term. It was the nickname for the fearsome middle of the Yankee lineup. At the end of his career, with his body racked with pain from the disease that now bears his name, Gehrig called himself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. Day in and day out, the Iron Horse showed us the meaning of selfless professionalism. Fittingly, his consecutive games played streak would stand for more than half a century before being broken by another consummate pro, Cal Ripken Jr. Sports continued to be a growing part of American life, despite the distractions of outside events. Knute Rockne and his Notre Dame football team were dominating the college game, and George Halas and his Monsters of the Midway were the kingpins of the professional gridiron. Bobby Jones was retiring at the top of his golf game. Babe Diedrichson shone the first light of legitimacy on women athletes. Baseball turned on brighter lights, playing its first night game in 1935. And the Cubs, as hard as it may seem to believe, were going to the World Series on a semi-regular basis. But while America was trying to regain its emotional and economic footing, a new aggressive style of leadership was disturbing a delicate balance in Europe.
Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini all rose to power in this turbulent decade, setting the stage for a conflict that would shake the entire world to its roots. Everything was now magnified and rife with implications, including sporting events. The Joe Louis, Max Schmeling heavyweight bout wasn't just a fight between two title contenders, It was Uncle Sam versus Nazi Germany. Jesse Owens wasn't just running for Olympic glory in 1936 Berlin Olympics. He was running for the national and racial pride. Once again, the simple purity of athletic competition had elevated mankind above the pettiness and blind injustice. The spirit of sportsmanship had proven to be much bigger than prejudice and hatred. Thanks to the immediacy of radio, Americans were able to follow Owens' marvelous exploits as they happened. His victories united the country, black and white, at a time when we needed to pull together. We held Owens' performance close to our hearts, but the rumblings of war were growing louder, and our next showdown with Germany would not be on the playing field, but on the battlefield.
$73-0. What does that score mean to you? If you're a football fan, and especially a Chicago Bears fan, you probably know that it was the final score of the 1940 NFL championship game, when superstar Sid Luckman blanked the Washington Redskins. Knowing that answer would have been anything but trivial if you were suspected of being an infiltrator on the battlefield in World War II. So, soldiers, how many games was Joe DiMaggio's hitting streak? What was Ted Williams' batting average in 1941? Any red-blooded American soldier would have those answers on the tip of his tongue, because then, as now, the language of sports was a common language to us all. Although the United States was not yet officially at war when this era began, there was a sense of uneasiness and trepidation. And then on December 7th, 1941, the war America didn't want to join became the war America could not stay out of.
When Japanese fighter planes bombed Pearl Harbor, the war instantly became more urgent and tangible to the American people. It was no longer somebody else's war. It was ours, all of ours. And our athletic heroes, they went off to help fight it. In the last idyllic months before the day that has lived in infamy, Joe DiMaggio hit in 56 straight games. Ted Williams became the last of the 400 hitters. And now they were leading a parade into the armed forces that depleted major league rosters. By 1945, a total of 384 major league veterans were in the service, and their ranks included other All-Stars and future Hall of Famers, such as Lou Kapling, Bob Feller, Hank Greenberg, Bill Dickey, Phil Rizzuto, Warren Spahn, Gil Hodges, Stan Musial, Pee Wee Reese, and on and on. When the war finally ended, we rejoiced, and some of the most glorious homecomings were those of the ball players who again traded fatigues for uniforms. And no city had a better collective reason to welcome back its heroes than Chicago, as the Cubs, resuming their ways of the 1930s, won the 1945 pennant and met the Tigers in the World Series. And then the end of this decade brought a welcome departure from another kind of normalcy, the accepted exclusion of black Americans from America's pastime. Jackie Robinson was the carefully scrutinized, hand-picked choice of Brooklyn Dodgers general manager Branch Rickey to cross the sports color line in 1947. Jackie turned deaf ear to a season-long chorus of profane treatment to succeed as a player and as a person. He was the National League Rookie of the Year, and through him, we moved a step closer to succeeding as a human race.
The America of the 1950s was the stuff dreams are made of. When we refer to the good old days, these are the days we mean. High Hopes was a hit pop song on everyone's lips, and it aptly reflected the spirit of those heady times. Soldiers return home to a new era of hope and projected prosperity. The man in the green fatigues transformed into the man in the gray flannel suit. With World War II safely in the rearview mirror and the Korean War coming to an end, Americans went about the business of building the American dream, a dream of white picket fences, V8 engines, and green suburban bliss. Suddenly, America had time on its hands. Golf, the ultimate sport of the leisure class, experienced an unprecedented boom. Arnold Palmer and Slammin' Sammy Snead became household names. No longer burdened by the threat of war, America's youth loosened its collective collar and began to unwind to a new hybrid form of pop music.
America was at a crossroads, even if it didn't realize it at the time. Traveling in a murky area somewhere between Father Knows Best and Blackboard Jungle. The road ahead would be long and bumpy, but the journey, as always, would be about freedom. The Happy Days image we commonly associate with the 50s doesn't accurately reflect the undercurrents of those often tense times. Jackie Robinson may have opened the doors for black baseball players in 1947, but in 1948, the Cleveland Indians' youngest player-manager in baseball, Lou Boudreau, a native of Harvey, Illinois, was instrumental in bringing the first black player to the American League, Larry Doby, and later brought to the team arguably one of the best or greatest pitchers that ever lived, Satchel Paige, to help bring the World Series to Cleveland. However, baseball would not fully integrate until the end of the decade, when Pumpsie Green joined the Boston Red Sox in 1959, crossing the sport's last remaining color line. Yet many of those doors still were closed to the majority of black America. Basic freedoms, the same ones that black and white veterans had fought side by side for in World War II, were still being denied to people based on color. But while sports were still not fully integrated, they were moving ahead of the national curve. In Chicago, baseball fans quickly embraced the first two black players on the Cubs, Gene Baker and Ernie Banks. In fact, few players are more readily identified as icons of their teams than Banks with the Cubs and Minnie Minoso with the White Sox. The Dodgers also featured the brilliant catcher Roy Campanella. Baseball was suddenly infused with a new wave of black stars, including future Hall of Famers like Henry Aaron, Larry Doby, and Willie Mays.
Black athletes were also coming to the forefront in the other popular team sports of the day. Sugar Ray Robinson captured the middleweight boxing crown and the imagination of the public with his quick fists and smooth style in and out of the ring. Pro football had the powerful Jim Brown. Basketball had the incomparable Wilt Chamberlain and his arch-rival Bill Russell. Even hockey had its first black player, Willie O'Ree of the Boston Bruins. It wasn't only black Americans who were breaking barriers and making headlines. Italian-American boxer Rocky Marciano was assembling a string of 49 straight victories in the ring. Switch-hitting slugger Mickey Mantle was following in the footsteps of other Yankee greats. Runner Roger Bannister ran a 4-minute mile in 1954. Bobby Thompson of the New York Giants hit what would later be called the shot heard round the world, a dramatic home run in a one-game playoff against the crosstown rival Brooklyn Dodgers in that same year. Yankee pitcher Don Larson threw a perfect game in the World Series of 1956. Johnny Unitas was breaking in as quarterback of the Baltimore Colts, who were on their way to becoming one of America's best-known and most beloved teams. The 1950s marked the last World Series appearance by a Chicago team. Nellie Fox and the Go-Go Sox were defeated by the Dodgers 4-1 in 1959. That's 40 years and counting, Chicago fans. Oh well, better luck next century.
Hi, I'm Scott Sanderson.
And I'm Mickey Morandini.
We hope you're having a great time.
Don't go away, because there's a lot more coming up.
There's something happening here. Well, that's what the song said, but what it is ain't exactly clear. The 1960s was a decade of sweeping change, an era of triumph, tragedy, and internal division unmatched in modern history. It was an age of courage and contradiction, of bravery and treachery. We walked on the moon, and we marched in anti-war protest. We celebrated a new breed of charismatic political leaders and mourned them as they were struck down in their prime. We fought for the freedom of others in a faraway land called Vietnam, where 55,000 of our America's finest, they left their hometowns never to return. Yet, we refused to grant true freedom to the people living in our own hometowns. Young people rebelled against the rules of the establishment. Race riots, sit-ins, and student protests tore through the moral fabric of our very country. Our battles on the home front were proving to be just as vexing and unwinnable as our battles in Southeast Asia. The assassination of President John Kennedy in 1963 shook America's soul, and it dropped the curtain on Camelot. The feeling would sadly become all too familiar as later in the same decade we would watch the same fate befall the great advocate for peace, Martin Luther King, and then Bobby Kennedy. Sports was not immune to this social upheaval. In fact, it was often at the center of it. The 1960s saw a young man from Louisville named Cassius Clay take the boxing world by storm. His good looks, quick wit, and graceful style in the ring made him one of America's most recognizable and likable athletes. When he became heavyweight champion of the world and he adopted the Muslim name of Muhammad Ali, some people started viewing him with a different and very unflattering light. Suddenly, a pariah in his own country, Ali took his career overseas.
Ali's credo was simple. I don't have to be who you want me to be. I'm free to be who I want. Freedom was what America was built on, and the struggle for freedom would nearly tear the country down in this era of revolution and discontent. Social standards were being challenged across the board. Arthur Ashe parlayed his dignity and tennis prowess into personal and social triumphs. Also, Wilma Rudolph was showing the world that a woman, and a black woman at that, could define herself through sports. Her 3 gold medals at the 1960 Olympic Games in Rome set a new standard for female athletes and opened the avenue of opportunity for generations to come. Sandy Koufax, the brilliant Jewish-American pitcher for the Los Angeles Dodgers, put his faith first when he refused to pitch in a World Series game because it fell on a Jewish high holiday. The 60s produced more than its share of remarkable heroes and performances. Roger Maris broke an unbreakable record when he hit 61 home runs in 1961. A few months later, on March 2nd, 1962, Wilt Chamberlain unleashed a mythical performance, scoring 100 points against the New York Knicks in a regular NBA game at Hershey, Pennsylvania.
Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays cemented their Hall of Fame status with consistently excellent performances. Maury Wills took the art of base stealing to new heights. Gale Sayers electrified football fans with his darting and slashing running style. And Dick Butkus reinvented the middle linebacker position with bruising, take-no-prisoners approach to defense. Broadway Joe Namath guaranteed an upset victory for the upstart AFL in the Super Bowl and then went out and made it happen. Bobby Hull introduced the slap shot, and the game of hockey was forever transformed. Here in Chicago, we witnessed 2 championships, the Blackhawks in '61 and the Bears in '63, as well as the birth of an NBA franchise, the Chicago Bulls. Now, despite making the playoffs as an expansion team, the Bulls had such a hard time getting any attention that head coach Johnny Red Kerr had to call in the postgame reports to the newspapers from a payphone. We also witnessed one of the most infamous collapses in the annals of sports history when the 1969 Cubs were overtaken by the amazing Mets. You know, looking back, the 1960s may have been sports' final decade of innocence. Big money was starting to have a big impact on how the games were conducted off the fields of play. And emboldened by the spirit of the times, athletes had to begin to demand new freedoms that had long been denied them. The games in the world in which they were played would indeed never again be the same.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome a nationally acclaimed comedian and a Chicago product, my buddy John Campanera.
Thank you, Tom. You know, I really believe it was the 70s where high salaries and big money became a big impact on sports. I remember watching actually I was listening to a White Sox game back in like 72 or 73, and they were getting blown out. They were like 20 games out or something. And Harry Carey and Jimmy Pearsall were doing the announcing, and they were actually literally going down the list of the players' roster and mentioning their names and the salaries they were making. And it was unheard of. You know, you never heard of announcers actually do this. And it was so funny because Harry Carey's going, look at this Bill Melton. He's making $725,000. And he's only batting .225.
How does he look the owner in the eye when he collects his check?
Cumberland University lost to Georgia Tech in football one time, 222 to nothing. The hell was going on that day? Imagine a losing coach at halftime. All right, we're not out of it yet. It's only 110 to nothing. Couple, 2, 3, 16 more touchdowns. We're back in it. Gotta get back to fundamentals. Tommy, you got to stop punting on first down. Got 4 downs to work. Billy, when you center the ball, you hike it backward. Back. Now, we're still ahead with the bookies. They're giving us 200. If we could just hold them. Meanwhile, on the other locker room, the coach is going, all right, who hasn't scored yet? Anybody? Kathy, grab your brother's helmet and you go down. So have a good time tonight. Enjoy yourselves. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good job. Johnny Campanera. Johnny Campanera. More than anything else, the 70s were about me. Not me in general, but about me. After the tumultuous 60s, America edged into an era of self-examination and awareness. Everyone, it seemed, wanted to do their own thing, whatever happened to be their own thing. No wonder one of the decade's biggest sellers was a self-help book by Robert Ringer, titled Looking Out for Number One. The Beatles, who now belong to America as much as they belong to any one place, disbanded to pursue their solo careers. Jackie Kennedy remarried, and Bobby Hull bolted from the Blackhawks to the upstart rival WHA Hockey League. Richard Nixon left the presidency in shame. Streaking, the art of running naked in public, became a phenomenon. Gurus and self-help experts proliferated. Disco dance music dominated the radios. The military draft was phased out. The 70s were an era of milestone achievements for women's sports. 1971, Billie Jean King became the first woman athlete to earn $1 million in a single year. And in 1972, the Women's Professional Golf Tour went big time, thanks in part to backing of singer Dinah Shore.
In many ways, it was an ugly decade for Olympics, contaminating what had been accepted as sport's purest expression. The blurring line between sports and world politics was erased by the killing of 11 Israeli athletes at the 1972 Olympics in Munich, all but overshadowing the 7 gold medals won by U.S. swimmer Mark Spitz. In 1976, it was a golden moment of perfection for gymnastics thanks to Miss 10, Nadia Comaneci, but the decade's Olympics were tarnished by strife and weakened by national boycotts. 1972 was a dark, sobering year. The opening of baseball season was delayed by a players' strike. Roberto Clemente, as close as baseball ever came to royalty, was killed in a plane crash as he attempted to fly supplies to earthquake victims in Nicaragua. Jackie Robinson died at age 53. A year later, the American League adopted the designated hitter rule, a fundamental change in our national pastime, resulting in one game being played by 2 different set of rules. We paid tribute to a new home run king, Henry Aaron, who retired with 755 career round-trippers.
In the 70s, we were about me. The 1980s were about me getting rich. The unabashed optimism of Ronald Reagan's Morning in America campaign set the tone for the decade of time when greed was good and success was excess. Everywhere you looked, the sky was the limit. Wall Street churned out scores of instant millionaires daily. 7-figure salaries became commonplace for athletes and movie stars. It was a decade filled with unlikely and unforeseen events, starting with the U.S. hockey team's miracle victory in Lake Placid. This crew of college kids took on the best and highest paid professionals the mighty Soviet could offer. And in doing so, they reinforced our faith in ourselves and our way of life. In Chicago, we celebrated our first championship in decades when it stomped their way to the top in 1985. They strutted, and they intimidated the opposing with a fierce defense and an optimistic a ball control offense, and they had fun doing it.
From Rush Street to Bourbon Street, the 85 Bears cut the wide swath through the National Football League. Speaking of wide, there was no one bigger than William who rushed for a touchdown on Monday Night Football. This was a team of character, like the incomparable Walter Payton and the all-tense Mike Singletary, the powerful Dan Hampton, the resilient Kevin Butler, as a team of characters like headband-wearing punky QB Jim McMahon. At the eye of the storm was Mike Ditka, a tough-as-nails coach who'd embodied the spirit and attitude of the city of big shoulders. After their resounding 46-10 thrashing of the New England, never again made it to the big game. One by one, they gradually went their separate ways, but their legends of the annals of Chicago sports remains gargantuan. Nations first have to be measured against the shuffling crew. This was a decade of which Wayne Gretzky began setting new standards of excellence for hockey players. The decade in which Michael Jordan began assembling his mythical high-flying magic act. This was the decade in which John Elway and Joe Montana pulled games and rabbits out of their hats, when Martina Navratilova rewrote the tennis record book. Even the White Sox and the Cubs made a rare postseason appearance in the crazy 80s, helped in no small part by the baseball's recently new double-tiered playoff system. This was the year that the earthquake interrupted the Giants-A's World Series by the Bay. The games resumed.
And here we are in the 90s. In the final decade of the 20th century, the future suddenly turned into the present. In the 1990s, high-tech computer, cable TV, and the World Wide Web broadened our horizons and shortened our attention spans. Sports naturally came along for the ride. Some might even say that sports occasionally found itself in the driver's seat on the road to media mania. Imagine for a moment that you were asked to invent the perfect sports superstar for the 1990s. The recipe would need to have the following ingredients. Start with a heavy dose of talent and competitiveness, mix in a sense of style and flair for the dramatic, add the ability to feel at ease in front of the camera and microphones. Combine it with the marketing muscle. You have Mr. Michael Jordan. In Chicago, a city star for winners, Jordan and his Bulls served up a gourmet feast of athletic excellence. 6 championships in 8 years, forever changed the image of the city of big shoulders and narrow trophy cases. Even as recently as 20 years ago, if someone were to ask you where you're from and you answered Chicago, their response would likely have been, oh yeah, Chicago, bang bang, Al Capone. Now it's, oh Chicago, Michael Jordan. Jordan set new standards for what we expected out of our star athletes. If someone could hit 70 home runs in a season the way Mark McGwire did in 1998, what other unreachable numbers might we see in the 21st century? Somewhere across that threshold, the next Walter Payton, Jordan, or the next McGwire, Sosa, Chelios, Grace, Woods, Gretzky, or Elway may now be waiting, preparing himself or herself to take the world by storm. That promise of the future, that dream of unimaginable excellence yet to come is why sports will always be worth watching. Thank you for being with us tonight. We'll see you in the 21st century. God bless you all, and God bless the dedicated professionals at St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. Good night, Chicago. Scotty, beam us up.